All right, well, welcome everyone to the final day of Black and Biophysics Week. Today we are focusing on our mental health, and we are very honored and thrilled to have Dr. Broderick Sawyer here with us. Dr. Sawyer is a psychologist specializing in liberation psychology, meditation, racial trauma, and compassion. He is the the founding director of the Racial Trauma Center at Genesee Valley Psychology. And today, his talk is titled Racial Gaslighting, Grounding Yourself in Ancestral Memory. Thank you so much, Dr. Sawyer, for joining us today.
Problem. Thanks for the intro. So today, we're not going to use slides here. So I'm going to keep things just more ancestral from the rip. This is really about being who you are. And when you are a Black person in any systemic structure in the United States, which you'll find is typically it's probably pretty racist. And what this does is it causes us really to internalize a lot of just racism in general. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But to understand this, what we first need to understand is just what racial gaslighting is. And a lot of people talk about racial gaslighting, as a thing that's happening right here, right now. Meaning that, okay, I, talk to a mentor, or I'm in a classroom full of white people. And then I feel as if, oh, maybe I'm not good enough to speak, or maybe I need to, talk white. I need to code switch to have them hear actually and take in what I'm saying, right? Now, the system of white supremacy makes this happen. It forces Black and brown folks into playing the white game, so to speak. Even the assumption that we have to use slides to talk or present information, right? That's very Western. We need to present information. We need to be very academic and professional, and we need to use statistics to back up what we're saying, So this is a Western style of seeking truth, and we have been indoctrinated into using those methods, their methods, to find truth. But before Europe invaded Africa, there were different ways of doing things, completely different. And if we don't understand who it is we are versus who we're not, then we run the risk of perpetuating just white supremacist ideologies, even if they aren't really natural to us. So let's just look at the dynamics here, the relational dynamics. So I understand that genetics is a thing. However, when it comes to behavioral reinforcement throughout generations is what promotes the activation or not of genetics, right? So if someone has the potential to become addicted to drugs or alcohol based on their genetic makeup, if their environment is kept insulated from that, then those genes will not become activated, right? So this isn't to argue nature versus nurture. This is just to say that, hey, behavior reinforcement and controlling your environment is more important in this discussion than is your genetic inheritance, right? And if we're African American, our genetic inheritance is that of just an absurd amount of trauma and torture at the hands of Europeans who brought us here. So let's just think about what we were reinforced for doing over time. And again, let's understand racial gaslighting, and then we'll move into ways to overcome that and to find that right here, right now, without needing to change what happened back then. So Psychologically speaking, there are obviously the physical aspects of being captured and forced to work against your will. We're not going to, re-traumatize ourselves and work our way through the mud with that. You know what happened. Psychologically speaking, what's going on is you deserve this. Look at your environment. You're in chains, right? You have to work for free. And if you want privileges, you have to cozy up to white people to get what you want. Now, this dynamic, right? White people's feelings are important. Africans, our ancestors who were slaves, our feelings were not important. We were reinforced for keeping our emotions small, keeping our thoughts small, thinking about what white people want us to think and want us to believe about ourselves before we consider what we think about ourselves or what we want to believe about ourselves. Now, 400 or so years with that dynamic, that exact dynamic being forced upon us, acting out the part of 3/5 of a person, acting the part, right? And very explicitly. It wasn't microaggressions, it wasn't subtle, it was explicit, 400 years. Okay. Now, we only have about 200 years since then, not even, right? So now you go 400 years being reinforced for believing something about yourself, and 150 to 200 where, yeah, you have more freedoms and more abilities, but look at what they do to our communities, right? So redlining gentrification, right? We're going to help you. We're going to improve the economics of your community, but we're not going to talk about the fact that we had a 400-year head start in buying up all of the land and controlling the land. So once you were released, you had no funds and all the land was already bought. So there's obviously an upper hand there. And then our communities are squeezed in financially. Okay. And then if you want to leave that community, you have to hand in your Black card. You can't go up into higher education and act Black or be yourself. That's a very loaded thing for Black people. And this is just seen in the code switch. You have to talk and act somewhat like a white person in your classes if you go into higher ed. And now the higher you go, the less Black people you see, right? And the more code switching you have to do to be able to get you a piece of paper to be able to do what it is that you want to do, right? So we have this traumatizing of our communities, right? Makes it so that we don't want to be exactly in our communities, or can make it complicated. And then if we leave those communities, now we have to put on this white mask. And now we have this split between ourselves and where we come from, right? So white supremacy squeezes us in, and we won't even mention, the fact that racial gaslighting also includes taking all the economics in your community. And then when you start experiencing trauma symptoms, whether it's aggression, violence, crime, things like that, now we're going to arrest you for conditions that we caused. You see how that works? That's gaslighting, right? So that's on a systemic level. In terms of who it is that you are, right? This is a little bit more subtle. And I think when we are in systems of academia, right, we are playing a game with a sense of desperation. When you're in a grad program, when you're in a PhD program, you want that doctorate bad, and I know how I felt, in my grad program. And for me, I had to choose who I was going to be. So, and I remember very, very vividly, in my clinical psychology program, this professor was trying to get me to diagnose this Black man with a personality disorder. If people don't know about personality disorders, very, very serious diagnosis. It can also, if you want to become a firefighter or go into the military, if you have personality disorder, on your medical history, they'll be like, nah. So it's very serious. And what this professor, she was white. I was, only black dude in the room, and one only two in the program. What the professor didn't understand is that the narcissistic tendencies that this young man had were actually protective for him in higher education. He had to believe he was the best. He had to believe that he could do things and sort of pick himself up because he didn't have anybody in his life to do that. So now my white supervisor, the majority of white psychology, tries to pathologize protective measures, protective psychological measures that Black people might employ, So again, pathologizing people for conditions that are created by whiteness, right? So in this space, I had to learn how to code switch without losing my identity as a Black man, without losing the swagger, that I come with, grew up like 30 minutes outside New York City. Like I'm gritty, I'm, just this way. And I think that African Americans in particular, we have so much soul, so much swagger, but we're oftentimes put in situations where we have to pretend that we're not that way, or we could be harmed in some way, shape, or form. We might not get a job. We might not get a loan. That professor might think X, Y, Z about me if I wear my head wrapped to class. You know what I mean? So all these just culturally natural things that we do, we have to pretend that we're not that. We have to pretend we're not who we are. It's fucked up. That's messed up. That's a messed up situation. And what we need to do is understand that we are not the mask. You can't forget that. You can't sacrifice who you are just to get a piece of paper. You have to pretend sometimes, but don't pretend to the point where you forget who you are, and that's really the essence of this particular discourse, is how to remember and how to act with the best of them, But first, we have to find ways to reinforce behaviorally, right? So think about this, right? And this is where I nerd out. If let's just think plants. Let's think this is liberation psychology right here. In essence, let's think about a plant on the windowsill, right? If the plant's not growing and the plant's not flourishing, it might be kind of dried out. You know what I mean? Or it might be overwatered, but it just won't feel really like its energy is just on 10, feeling vibrant. It doesn't feel that way. If you're not feeling up, if you're not feeling vibrant, that means that your soil, your environment needs nourishing, right? Now, yeah, we have assignments we got to do. Yeah, we're busy, yeah, we got a lot of stuff to do, but you remembering who you are is more important, than being perfect in your program. It is more important, you'll get the degree, but you got to make time to root yourself in who it is you are. So if we use this example once again, the plant is a specific kind of plant, right? You ever look, you ever get a plant from the shop, you look and it has very specific directions in it about how much water, indirect or direct sunlight, da, 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 da. So you got to figure out for yourself what it is that nourishes you, and you have to make behavioral investments in what makes you feel whole. Does this make sense? So if and this is, I'll just use myself. I remember at a time in grad school when I was kind of forgetting who I was. I was confused. I didn't feel Black. I felt like an alien, and I had to find ways that I could find myself. And one of those things was turn off my code switch after work. Whenever I was in a room full of Black folks, or I was like chilling or whatever it is, I'm not talking with my code switch anymore. So I would stop that 9 to 5. All right, cool, I'm done. Now I'm here. You know what I mean? I had to make investments in who I was and who I am, right? And then further, I learned that when I put Nas into my headphones, all of a sudden my Northeast Black dude identity comes right back. And so I had to figure that out. I had to figure out that, listening to Malcolm's speeches, or watching NBA, these things, they pulled my Blackness out of me and back to me. But you have to invest in that. So if white supremacy and systems are making investments in making it difficult for us to be Black, and we just go with whatever system they lay out and trust that system to bring us inner peace, then we've already failed. We're essentially kidnapped folks who are still in the kidnapper's house because we don't have a choice. That's the essence of what happened here. White supremacy is indigenous to the United States. Indigenous. It's native. That's how it started, and that's how it's been going. So yeah, you can participate in those systems. You can participate in those systems and make those systems better. But essentially, you have to know what you are and what you are not at the core. That's the issue here. We can participate, but if we forget who we are, then that's no good. Then we're coming from a place of whiteness rather than ourselves. Do you know what I'm saying? So that's those are the consequences here to not behaviorally investing in who it is that we are, what makes us feel Black and brings that Blackness back. You can't just, you know what I mean? Like, you can't just be that way all the time because you'll be punished for doing so. But you can't pretend to be a white person all the time because your soul would die. Right. So we got to strike that balance, especially when you're in grad school. And also keep in mind that once you leave grad school, don't keep re-traumatizing yourself. If you remember who you are and you're, you got your PhD degree or whatever it is, you have power to work in environments where you don't have to put up with microaggressions. You don't have to put up with that stuff, right? And I understand, we want to go, we want to study in this lab or study in that lab, but it ain't worth it if half of your day is fighting microaggressions. Could you imagine what you could do with less resources in another place, but you can actually feel like yourself and feel joyful and happy? That's a better situation. And we often look to white supremacist systems as if they're God, and as if they are, it's the only way to do things. But it's not. That's what they want you to think, so that you don't go invest in yourself and in your community and in developing your own systems, whether that's research or otherwise. The Racial Trauma Center I started because I wasn't taking that shit with academia. I wasn't taking it, so I went to a friend and started the Racial Trauma Center. And now we're doing things on our own terms, and I don't have to answer anybody. And I could talk just like this in my space. Why? I was uncompromising in creating space where my Blackness was celebrated so that I can do my job like it needs to be done for my people, without academia telling me, oh, well, you need 10, 20 years of data before you can start XYZ program. Or, your discrimination study isn't getting approved by the NIMH because, it's a bunch of white people approving what's studied versus what's not. You see what I'm saying? So you just got to understand these things and play according to the rules, according to what is, not what you wish it would be. And this is tricky. This is tricky because we have to exist in both worlds, and you have to get your degree before you can have the power to create your own situation. Not always, but generally speaking, that's kind of how it goes. So what we're going to do now, and this is my second sort of love, we're talking about race, but then we're also talking about finding ourselves, right? And rooting ourselves in our own identities. So you want to imagine that society and other people are sort of taking big balls of mud and they're throwing it at your consciousness. So things are sticking to you until your true self is just covered up in this mud. right? So now what most folks do is we take those projections, right? Well, you're a black man, so you only play basketball or rap, so I go play basketball, right? Or, you're a black woman, so, never be angry, pretend that you're not angry, and then it gaslights us into thinking that, oh, I don't want to be the angry black woman, but it's like, so what? You know what I mean? Like, you angry, right? They get us to believe that being angry or upset is a bad thing, and then we start to act that out and try to pretend that we're not, right? And that goes for black men, black women, so this mud, when we can't tell the difference between the mud and ourselves, we're in trouble. Meditation and centering, generally speaking, so centering practices and behaviorally investing in who we are, that will help you determine what is the mud and who's the person underneath. And that's how we find ourselves, but we have to practice each day, whatever that is, so let's do a very, very brief sort of centering exercise, right? And centering, you want to keep in mind, it's beyond your emotions and it's beyond your thoughts. Your thoughts are essentially a collection of projections that you have received from society, caregivers, all of that. So who we think we are is really what other people think of us, and we have then internalized that into our identity. So your thoughts reference past experiences and situations, and then project future predictions based on the past. So really what that means is you're projecting past predictions based on what you already know, but that's why presence, that will show you who you are. That can give you insight. That can help you see things clearly, see yourself clearly, see others clearly. But we have to practice sitting and centering inside of ourselves to get at what we call the felt sense, that core feeling, sensing awareness. It's not thinking, right? It can observe the thoughts. It's not feeling. It can observe the feelings. It's not hearing, it's observing the hearing. So that felt sense is really like this squishy, spongy, flexible part of your consciousness, which is inside. It's inside here. It's something that you can tap into. But first, we need to become very quiet. And our minds tend to speed us up out of that silence, and in our programs and in our, well, I got to do this next, or I got to do this next, or, what the hell is this guy talking about? This, that, da, 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 da. There's an inner narrative. You're telling stories about your experience rather than having the experience. And that's the problem when we always follow our thoughts and we never center. We're just moving to next, to the next, to the next, but it's not really the next. It's the past next. You see what I'm saying? So we're rolling, rather than boom, staying here, right? And your thoughts are like a horse and you're like the driver, right? Now you can either ride the horse or let the horse ride you. You know what I mean? So centering allows us to see our thoughts clearly, see where we are in the compare, and being able to compare where we are versus where our thoughts want us to be, right? And then we can become comfortable sitting, being present with ourselves, seeing ourselves clearly, finding our ancestral identity clearly, right? So very brief exercise here, and then let's open it up a bit for just questions and thoughts. But let's start by just finding this more silent inner space. And all you do is close the eyes, and you want to find a comfortable position, wherever that is for you. You want to lay down, that's cool. You want to sit up, just whatever it is, find a comfortable space. And all you want to do is begin to take very deep in breaths. all the way in. And then all the way out. And I want you to keep breathing in this way, all the way in, all the way out. And on the out breath, I also want you to try to relax your shoulders, the neck, the jaw, your facial muscles, anything that's tight. With that out breath, right, I want you to just release and sink into the seat. Sink into your own space, your own energy. Sink in. Just keep breathing in this way. And what you're doing is you are literally turning down the volume on the stress hormone known as cortisol. So when you breathe deeply, you're essentially soothing fear. And when we soothe fear, we can see clearly. Fear is like the mud at the bottom of a lake. You're standing in a lake and you start to stomp around, mud comes up and you can't see where you are. You can't see clearly. But when we practice stillness and we don't move and we breathe and we relax, that mud settles and then we can see again. We can see our feet. We can see fish. And more importantly, when you're present and when you're not afraid, when your mind isn't clouded by the mud of fear, you can also see that crocodile coming at you. And you can get out of the way. When you're afraid, when you're stomping around, moving from one moment to the next, you can't see potential harm coming at you, and you can't see potential peace. So practicing stillness and breathing and slowing down, it's about settling fear, slowing down, and seeing reality clearly. I want you to now let your breath settle. So no more deep breaths. Just allow your breath to just resume at a natural rhythm. So no more deep breaths. Just let your breath breathe itself. And I want you to see if you can just feel yourself feeling. Feel yourself sensing. There's something that's sensing the contact that your body is making with your seat. There's something that is sensing sounds coming from my voice, and there's something sensing that these words mean something. And see if you can just reach back, zoom out, and allow that space, feeling of sensing, to just expand a little bit. Just tuning in to who the sensor is, who the perceiver is. The camera can't take a picture of itself, but at the very least, we can tune into how the camera feels. Don't get distracted with the pictures. Don't get distracted with the sounds or with your thoughts. Just Slow down and perceive without fixating on what you like or what you don't like, what's acceptable, what's not, what's annoying, or what's not. Don't get caught up in that. Those are your opinions, your judgments. Those are programmed from your past. You think something is good, you've had past experiences that were positive and helped you feel good. If you think something is bad or silly or annoying, you've had past experiences, right? So get out of that. Observe your thoughts, observe yourself playing out as a part of your conditioning. And your leverage here, when we zoom back far enough, you see our conditioning, our personality, our thoughts. We can see all that for what it is and move beyond it. Choose differently. Don't just be on automatic. Be in the present. And you can punch your ticket. You can create your own destiny when you're choosing consciously, beyond conditioning, beyond who you were told you're supposed to be, beyond your fear, beyond anxiety, anger, joy, peace. It's all just passing show of sensation. But the witness, the perceiver remains. Move yourself into the identity of the horse rider, not the horse. And in this last space, I just want you to listen to your inner awareness. And true listening is leaning in with a willingness to be changed by what you hear. I want you to just sit and listen with openness and silence. Just listen to your inner awareness, what it might be feeling or wanting or hoping. Take note. And when you're ready, you can just take one more, two more breaths. Just remembering this awareness, remembering what's behind your thoughts and your immediate reactions. Just remember this. And when you're ready, you can open the eyes, come back. So now, why don't we open it up for questions or thoughts in general? And if we run out of questions, then we can move into other exercise. But yeah, let's open it up a bit.
So our attendees, you can you can raise your hand and then we can unmute you so you can ask questions directly to Dr. Sawyer. You can also write your questions in the Q&A. But there is already a question from Lisandra. Dr. Sawyer, can you see the chat?
Yes, I can. So let's see. Everyone can see it. So just go ahead and read that. And take some time for everybody to read this too. Really soak this in. And what we're really dealing with here is, it seems, rejection at all angles. Rejection at all angles. And when we are experiencing rejection in this way at all spaces, the first thing that we need to do is we need to gauge how much of this are we taking in and internalizing. Am I rejecting myself? What behaviors am I doing in my life that are reflections of the lack of self-love? Okay, that's first. Second, and more importantly, you need to sort of take stock of who it is in your life, who are the people in your life that care about you, that love you for you. And what you need to do is turn up the volume on frequency of contact with those people, right? Because we can't stop the rejection of the outside world, no matter how intersectional it might be. We have to be real about the fact that we can't stop that right now. I can engage in activism, right? I can, do different things, but the system is slow moving. So people's hearts and attitudes towards people, we can't change those overnight. So we need to think about, all right, do I love myself as I am? Just don't worry about what they're thinking about you. What do you think about you? And if you have negative views about yourself, then it's your job to embrace yourself and to love yourself just from you to you. It's not about that. It's about from you to you, looking in the mirror right here, right? And if we have trouble with that, and I know a lot of people that do, myself included, you have to, again, take stock of the people who celebrate you for you and love you for you. Those are the people that you want to talk to and spend time with. You know what I mean? Or if it's certain things that make you feel really good about yourself, you got to do more of those things. What are you good at? What do you like? What makes you laugh? What kind of food you like? You have to start treating yourself like you are your own friend and like you want to make yourself happy. So then what tends to happen then, if you love yourself enough, then when you're talking to somebody and they're trying to make you feel bad or whatnot, number one, you don't believe it, so you don't internalize it. So then when racism or any sort of a ism is happening to you, you're not taking it in because you control your vision and your view of yourself. It doesn't come from the outside, right? But then when you're talking to folks who aren't respecting you or aren't treating you like a good friend, like you treat yourself, then it'll be obvious. It'll be like, well, I ain't putting up with that, and then that's where boundary setting really comes in. But it has to start from a genuine affection from within yourself, and then also getting that behavioral reinforcement from other people just in your circle. So yeah, that's what I would say to that. Sounds like, yeah, you're going through a lot, but what I would say is don't try to change what people are saying, how people are relating to you. Change how you relate to yourself, and only let people in your inner circle, in your vulnerable space, who respect you and who make you feel good about yourself, right? And that's how we protect our identity. We have to find reflections in the environment that uplift us and make us feel good. And it's almost like you want to give yourself an energy audit. Who's giving you that energy that's making you not really know where you stand, who's being petty, whatever, and making you just not feel good, and cut that right out of your life. Don't take it in. Your mental health and your heart is impacted a lot by what you allow into your emotional space. So yeah, very, very long story short, but yeah.
Thank you. There is another question from Elijah. He had a question about code switching. Often I hear it about in the context of intentionally speaking or acting differently in certain spaces. Is there another term for subconscious code switching, or does that still count as code switching?
I would say any code switching is code switching. And let me frame it to you this way. So I'm in a situation where a white person is expecting me to speak in a certain way, or I'm either, say, not going to be heard, or maybe they'll call the police or whatever it is, right? So why am I doing that? Whether it's consciously or unconsciously, well, it's to avoid harm. It's to avoid harm. It's to maybe avoid losing my job or getting killed by the police, right? So in essence, I do not want to be traumatized. So my mind is doing something to avoid being traumatized, right? So that is a trauma response. Code switching is a trauma response. We've been taught and reinforced for, oh, you speak up, then you get hit. Then that's it. So over time, over generations and generations. So anything done for long enough becomes unconscious, right? But it's still the same mechanism. Just like when you're reading, at first when you're reading and you're learning, you're like elephant, elephant, and then you're sounding it out, very intentional, right? But over time, it becomes just automatic, right? So automatic behaviors, whether they're conscious or they're unconscious, right? They're the same thing. And I try to not get with this stuff. I wouldn't get too fixated on words and language, right? And this is also a Western thing, getting locked into and we're all indoctrinated into it, myself included. We're indoctrinated into the system where, oh, here's this new term for this. Oh, here's this new term for that, or this new term for this. And it's just a recycling of another term or something, a new twist or something like that. But language is very limiting in terms of understanding what phenomena are. But when you are sitting and you notice yourself feeling fear in response to a white guy's question or something like that, and then you start to change the way you're talking, the experience of that is code switching. It doesn't matter what the term is. The experience is where truth is. You know what I'm saying? And why do you think we did a meditation? I wanted you to experience yourself. That's truth. You know what I mean? So so while we want to learn about these terms and apply them, focus on observing your experience more if you want to understand the essence of code switching. And that's what we got lost in, not paying attention to our experience, rather looking outward. So with anything, including code switching, to understand the process of it, just observe yourself and get really good at observing yourself. That's truth right there.
So I have a question myself, but I'd like to give the floor to the attendees. Please share either written or raise your hand. I saw somebody did raise their hand a while ago, but they put it down. But I guess while we wait, I'll go ahead. So part of what Lisandra spoke of resonates with me. And I think particularly because it's hard to feel rejection within your own community that you are also an advocate for, you do hard work for, you think of. And I think as I've learned more recently, it's just the diversity of being Black, being an African American, being Afro-Latino or Latina, being from Africa, any country in Africa. It's just the diversity of our experiences is so vast that I think even within our own communities, we are unable to communicate as intended. And so I guess my question is, how do you advise these different relations, like we partaking these different relationships where you feel that part of your identity as a Black person is being questioned because you're not my type of Black, you know, like you're mixed or whatever.
Yeah, so yeah, it's this, and this is tough because we have relationships in our lives that we want to keep, you know, people from our communities that we want to hold on to and that we want to help, right? But if anybody, it don't matter who they are, is making you doubt who you are, or someone is rejecting you, then you need to learn how to not own the mud and take in the mud that they're throwing at you. Just like whites, you know, just like white folks in programs or whatnot, wherever it comes from, you got to learn to distinguish your own self-definition versus what other people are slinging at you, right? So this is difficult for me to communicate because you first need to practice self-defining. If you haven't started that process to self-define, then it's going to be like, wait a second, but my identity has been, you know, formulated by these people and I care what they think about me and I want to make them, I want to, you know, satisfy, you know, what they expect me to be. That's their expectations. That's not yours. You got to first ask yourself who you want to be on the inside. Who are you, you know? And then what will happen is you essentially want to think about it like a magnet. So everybody is just a magnet. A lot of magnets are turned off. So that means they're not repelling what needs to be repelled and attracting what they need to attract. So what you need to do is you need to find your frequency. That's why I'm so big on centering. Just make a list. What makes me feel good? Is it, you know, is it watching, you know, is watching this show or that show? Is it, you know, eating this food or that kind of food? You know, is it like widening my scope of sexuality over what I was taught to be? You know what I mean? So whatever it is, no matter how extreme or not of a change for whoever it is, right? You have to find who you are at the core and turn the volume up on that. And when you turn the volume up on that piece, then when you're maybe at a family function or something like that, and someone was like, "Oh, you sound white," or whatever, da da da, you know, and they're talking about it like it's a negative thing. They're telling you that you shouldn't be the way that you are, right? And if you are that and you can't change that, then what are you supposed to do? Be somebody else? Be uncomfortable? Wear a mask and a suit that doesn't fit for them? You know what I mean? So you can wear things, you know, in the moment, you know what I mean? But you can't get lost you can't be what other people expect you to be. You never were that. You have to own who it is that you are. But that is a very significant inner journey. And you have to turn that volume up. It's almost like, what else I'll say about this is it's almost like we think that we need to meet people where they are, right? So what we end up doing, you know, if two people are on the opposite side of the spectrum of who they are, the one either goes too far in meeting that other person there, or you come to the middle, but you're sacrificing half of who you are, you know? So instead, what you got to understand is be here, be who you are. And then what you'll find is, you know, in the next frame, you'll be like, oh, snap, like there's other people over here who will accept me for who I was, but I just wasn't being who I was. So they didn't know I existed. You see how that goes? You know, so when you open up and you are who you are, you attract what you need to attract and you repel what you need to repel when you stand in who you are. And it is sort of summed up in an academic interview. I still feel bad about this. I was an asshole. I was in an academic space and they were just asking me stupid academic questions, room full of white people just trying to flex on me. And I just wasn't having it. And I listened to who I was on the inside, and I didn't perform well in that interview. They didn't ask me to come in there. And that's what was supposed to happen. I wasn't working there. I didn't like them. They didn't like me. All right, cool. Now we can each move on, and they can get what you can get what you want, and I can get what I want. And with family members, it's a matter of, hey, you're going to accept me for who I am. It is what it is. You know what I mean? If you're going to disown me because, I am what I am, then that's your choice. But I'm not going to sit here and try to convince you why the way I talk is acceptable, and whatever. If you're already explaining yourself to other people, you've already lost. To interact with that which is false is to make it true. That's the essence of gaslighting. So it's almost like people playing tennis. You just got to start dropping the tennis racket. It is what it is, and there's a lot of gray area in between that. We've all had, the family member we got to pretend with or front with, if it's a grandma, when you get married, it's just like, well, if I don't want to or whatever, I'm not going to break my grandma's heart. She's 96, there are certain moments, but you want to make sure you're most yourself more often than not, and never getting lost in your presentations to people.
Thank you so much. I feel like that must resonate with most of us here in the audience, that we have to navigate our code switching, that in some cases is kind of a necessity given the circumstances, but don't take it to heart for too long. Any other questions? I haven't seen anything yet, but I have I have a bunch of questions. So from me, like, I can keep going. So I guess you spoke about how in academia, there is place for us to be ourselves and be our genuine selves, and not have to constantly perform to be what is accepted, which is mostly white. It's mostly associated with whiteness. And my question for you is, once we're not established, right? A lot of us are, we're still in grad school, or we're going to do postdocs, and then even in academia as a professor, you still have to get tenure, and so it seems like it's the perfect advice, but at the same time, it just doesn't seem feasible, because a lot of what we're trying to accomplish is kind of the long-term goal, right? And so we haven't gotten to our safe place where we can actually be ourselves yet. And so I guess my question for you is, if you haven't established yourself yet, and you still feel like you're not in a safe space for you to be your genuine self, how do you navigate academia without, silencing part of who you are entirely until you get to the point where you want to be?
Yeah, I would say the number one thing here is finding who you are at the core. If we don't know who that genuine self is, then we don't know really what they need or what they're reacting to, right? So think about it this way. So I go into graduate school, and I think to myself, okay, I'm going to get my PhD in clinical psychology. What do clinical psychologists do? They research, they practice, or they teach. Then I'm like, okay. And then I'm thinking long term, that's how I'm going to be. That's what's going to happen, right? I'm going to, within these guidelines, I'm going to be this kind of person, right? The issue with that is I am thinking years ahead about a situation that I can't really see, and I can't really know how it feels. I don't know how that situation in the future will feel. So I'm basically charting course for my entire future without considering what I want right now, who I am right now, what makes me tick. So I think grad school does this thing where it gets us to think in this linear way. But the problem is the systems that were set up were for people who aren't exactly concerned about the liberation of their communities, right? So now we are sort of taking on their path and way of thinking about it as if our life situations are similar. So I'm not saying that there is a right or wrong way to go about it, but we need to pay attention to that discrepancy. The traditional tracks, for folks, though, these systems are made up and dominated by white folks. So I think the most important thing to do is to become present with who we are right here. The future, that will be there. Those things will be there. But most importantly, we need to contact this. Because if I was in that job interview, focus on track and focus on just that, then I might have taken a job just to get a track and been unhappy, in my job. And if I ignored the anger, then I wouldn't have attracted what I needed to attract. And there's a lot of fear in that because, you know what I mean? Like, well, if I'm not like traditional, like, where do I belong? Where do I go? But when we haven't found ourselves, that's where fear is. Fear happens when we don't know who it is in there. Once we know who's in there, we become uncompromising in providing space for that person to really breathe and be. But I think the most important thing we can do is start to set up our environment in such a way that helps us hang on to that while we're in graduate school. Because while you're in graduate school, it's one of the most confusing identity-based times of all time. All you got to do is focus on just getting a piece of paper first, and hanging on to yourself, relatively speaking, and then at each moment sort of reflecting on that true self kind of awareness. If you're in a job interview and you're feeling really in your true self is feeling really filled, really good with this, this Afro-Latina sitting across from you who does, something similar that you do, you'll know that feeling. But then when you're sitting across somebody who's like dry and just like trying to box you in or whatever, then your true self will be like, ugh, I hate this, So we need to, whether you're going to stay in academia or not, I would say the most important thing is making sure that you're aware of who that true self is, what they're feeling when they're sitting across from someone. Because once you get that piece of paper, then you're going to be able to, get jobs wherever it is that you want. And I think the last piece of that, and this is pretty important, at least for myself, definitely important for myself. Whatever it is that you're good at, make time to work on your craft. Really make that time, and become great. Because if there's anything that white folks can't take away from you, if you're talented, you're talented. And if you focus on the things that help you stand out, whether it's a specialization, race-based stress and trauma, something that makes you more unique than others, meditation, mindfulness, self-compassion, some Freudian style therapy. So as a Black person, you can keep yourself safe, relatively speaking, and have control over your destiny, your career, is you take on becoming great at something that the field needs. Don't just become a carbon copy, in that way. And if you value your uniqueness, then you become rare. And when you become rare, you become desirable, right, on the market, or just wherever it is, whatever it is that you want to work. But this is hard. Grad school is a hard space. What I would say is grad school is kind of like a time to hibernate your identity, but don't forget who that is, because it's hard to, like, be at home chilling, just acting like you act, and then you got to go into work, and then all of a sudden you're like a white person. That like dissonance is really stressful. So you have to keep in mind that that's time limited. Like, there's impermanence here. And then also invest in what it is that you want to be. You don't need to go read all of the scientific papers, maybe to know a new theory about something. People write books You can just read a shorter book and absorb the information. That's a lot of what I did. I wasn't going to learn about Buddhism from, or Malcolm X from, articles. I just went out and started reading books and started applying what I knew. People synthesize in books in a way that scientific literature doesn't. That's why scientific jargon is jamming up the power of academia, because it's not applied. So you have to pick your spots and find your way, learn about what you want to learn about, and invest in your talent, invest your time into yourself, and really building that up, so that this is terrible, but I almost think about it like being in prison and you're just working out and working out and working out for when you get out, you're ready to go, but you have to center in that identity. If you feel like you're not sure about who that person is as you listen into this and you don't really know who that person is, then that's a sign that you need more centering. That means just writing down the things that I like to do, go doing those things, feeling how I feel when I feel those things. So then I'm like, okay. It's almost like knowing the difference between what chocolate ice cream versus like, I don't know, something I don't like coffee flavored ice cream. If you never taste the chocolate, then you don't know when the chocolate's right in front of you. So you have to do these things that make us feel good, so we have a frame of reference too. Because if we don't have that, even though I'm talking to an advisor, oh, do you want to be my dissertation committee? If I don't know what makes me feel good, then if this person could be gaslighting me, microaggressing, and I won't notice, because all I'll see is I need to get this dissertation done, committee. Okay, cool, linear. We're robotic, and we can't allow that system to take that away from us. Certain situations you'll get into, you'll have to be that way, but we always want to be able to reference, all right, how does Broderick really feel about this? Okay, Broderick, so you're really pissed. Do you have a choice in this matter? Like, do you have to? No? Well, all right, man, you're just going to be mad, make sure you do something to soothe yourself, after you're out of this situation, and we always have to reference. We need that reference point of who we are. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Sawyer. We are at time, so I want to thank you again from the Black in Biophysics Week Organizing Committee. This has been absolutely wonderful, and we're looking forward to hearing from you and inviting you again to our future events as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Appreciate y'all. Hey, stay up, and find that center. But I appreciate y'all. Thanks for having me. Y'all have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thank you. You too. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.